and we need to find ways to let our fans in on that. That's not going to take away the pain of seeing a player we all love go play somewhere else. But if we have that for real, we are going to be able to ride that, and we're going to be able to win. And we need to let our fans in on that as much as we possibly can. I thought last year we had more talent in the room than we did in 21. I think this year we're going to have more talent in the room than we did in 21.
Ready, Coop?
Ready to go.
All right. 3, 2, 1. All right. Well, baseball isn't boring. And I know that because I experienced it this last week. We all experienced it this last week of the winter meetings. And we are honored to have on Chaim Bloom. And I'll say this. I love our conversations with Chaim. And we've only had a couple of podcast conversations, but this is the forum. This is the I think the way to have these sort of conversations about big topics, small topics, everything. And Chaim's always great at it because he comes on and he has the conversations. And the first question I would have for you, Chaim, first of all, welcome into the week.
Thank you.
Was there a single time in San Diego where you thought baseball was boring, where that you were bored?
I don't think there's been a single time since the day I got here in October of 2019 that I have been bored. That's one thing. There have been some high highs and some low lows, but this gig is never boring. I obviously would not be here if I thought baseball was ever boring. Certainly was not in San Diego.
Can you show the shirt? There it is. There it is.
Yeah, repeat guess. You got to.
It's not only words; it's also actions. He's wearing a baseball isn't boring shirt, which we appreciate. I also, by the way, I meant to tell this to you, but everyone was scurrying around when we had the media availability. I owe you $10 because you did mention Joe Kelly in your first press conference of the week, which I felt like was very nice of you. So there you go. That's good for book sales. So thank you. $10.
I'll take it.
All right. So let's get down to brass tacks here. My question is, first of all, what was there a worse way to punctuate your time in San Diego than seeing me at the airport?
Is that independent of everything that went down with Xander, or just generally speaking?
It just felt like you came around the corner and you basically gave me the Heisman and said, I'm good. But I totally was sympathetic to listen. I mean, even if there wasn't anything going on at the airport, I probably wouldn't have talked to you a whole bunch because you're amongst your people. But sort of my question is sort of what was your feeling at that point? Not just because you saw me coming around the corner talking to Rocco Baldelli, chopping it up, but what was your sort of feeling right then and there?
Yeah, look, I think because of the way that the day happened in the public eye, I think there was this assumption that moment, which let's just to set the stage for all the listeners, this was, within 10 minutes, maybe 10, 15 minutes of it getting out in public, that Bogey had agreed with the Padres, that I think there was this assumption that was when we knew that he was not going to be a Red Sox anymore. And that really wasn't the case. Just behind the scenes, the way the day had gone on, and even a little bit the previous night, I think we had a sense of where it was headed. And just, look, I think we need to own this. It was headed somewhere that we were not going to go. I think if we beat around the bush there, we're just trying to snow people. We shouldn't do that. And actually, Rob, as you talk about this format, and I do think it's a good format to have a discussion. Sometimes when we're in kind of press conference style, especially when the goal is to get a soundbite, the goal is to get a gotcha line, it's harder to really break down a topic. And one thing, with you and our conversations, we've always been able to do that. And we can't run from this one. We shouldn't run from this one. So in any case, it wasn't a huge surprise to us at that moment. I will say at that moment, knowing this was likely coming, and then when it happened, just being hit by the weight of it, and not just for me, probably least of all for me, but for the organization, for literally millions of people who this news would hit very hard. And I know that, I get it, I understand it. And, that's really what was hitting me in that moment. Now, that on top of, I've been to almost 20 winter meetings. I don't think I've ever left one not exhausted. It's just the nature of the way the event works. So even if this had been the least eventful winter meetings in baseball history, I still don't think I would have wanted to talk to anybody. Just by the end of those few days, we're all wrecks and everybody can't wait to get out of there. But obviously, knowing what was coming, just not knowing exactly when it would happen, and then being hit by all those different things when it did happen. That was what was happening there. Okay, so you said the previous night you got that vibe. Can you sort of walk me through this? Because I think that this is sort of a thing that a lot of people, and one of the things that I'm going to ask you along the lines is some of the things that maybe you think are misperceptions that you want to clear up. This is a good forum to do that, I think. If there's anything along those lines, but in regards to the timeline, you said the night before you had this feeling. Was that was it so definitive the night before where you're telling the ownership group, hey, listen, this just isn't going to work out? No, not necessarily to that point. And look, there's some things I probably shouldn't pull back the curtain on, but just generally speaking, I think that was when we really started to realize that there was a really good chance that this was going, in terms of years and dollars, to a place that, like I said, we just weren't going to go. Now, even with that, there was still conversation, with us, with Xander's representation throughout the next day. Throughout Wednesday. So yeah, okay. Throughout Wednesday, some formal, some informal, and there's always, even when you're in one of those things, there's always a chance. And, especially when that you're talking about a player who likes it here. But I think it became clear to us, not having any hard evidence, but just understanding where the conversations were going, the intel we had, so to speak, what we were hearing, that this was going to end up, somewhere in a territory that we weren't going to go. And that usually when that happens, it means you don't get the player. Well, when you talk about intel, that's interesting, because another thing I would love to know is, well, does it get to the point where they say, hey, we got this offer and you want to match it or not? Or do you have to rely on, like you said, intel or vague conversations? Did it ever get to that point where Xander's representative said, listen, this is what we're dealing with. Here you go. If you want them, come get them. Usually it's not that specific. There are some situations where it is. Usually it's not. Again, without saying too much, in this case, it wasn't as specific, but, just kind of the general territory, I think we understood to be, somewhere that, again, we weren't going to go. When you talk about going through that day on Wednesday, I don't know what the dynamic is with, I know Sam Kennedy's there, but is there a lot of back and forth with the owners? Is there, hey, what can we do? What are you thinking? Because ultimately, you've said this before, they're the ultimate decision makers. They're your boss, and they're going to decide what's what when it comes to how much you invest in a certain player. What does that day look like in terms of your back and forth? And again, I'm not asking for a transcript of your conversations, but just like, what's the back and forth, and when's the last time? Was it about midday? Was it night where we all just got together with the ownership group and said this isn't going to happen? It never went down exactly like that. We had talked the night before, and then there was some more conversation on Wednesday, between us and ownership in various ways, just seeing, where this was and where it might go, where we might go. Ultimately, again, I think we kind of came to the understanding that there was going to be a real gap, because it was going to go somewhere that we weren't. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to get the player, but usually it does. And then that understanding kind of developed over the course of the day, Wednesday, and then ultimately, led to us realizing at some point in that day that they were going to lock in with another club and try to do a deal.
You've obviously done a lot of deals, and every deal has to go through ownership. But this one with Chaim, this one was always perceived as a little bit different because, I mean, let's just be honest. There's a business aspect of it. Maybe there isn't for other players. Same thing coming up with Devers, and we use the examples of the names on the back of the little kids' uniforms, right? I mean, so in that respect, did you expect? And I don't think ownership has always said, "Hey, Chaim, go do your thing. This is the reason why we hired you." But did you expect that in this case, in the Xander case, that ownership might be a little bit more involved in terms of, I don't want to say driving the ship, but certainly basically being more involved?
I think the best way I could say it is that, they are involved. Like I said, these are organizational decisions. There's an aspect to this type of decision that, I think requires that type of involvement to a degree that, this is an extreme parallel, but if we're making a waiver claim, there's not a phone call to ownership about the waiver claim. And, this is different. So, that's not to say that we in baseball operations don't, have a huge say in what goes on with this. And that's not to hide from that in any way. But it's just reality. There's some decisions that are big organizational decisions. And there's some that are probably best contained more to baseball ops. Every organization, every front office, every ownership group does those things a little differently. But, something like this, they need to be involved, and they were.
Yeah, this was a big one. I don't know if you know this. This was so
I know.
big.
I know.
It was so big that you termed it as Plan A, and I thought that was a pretty strong comment. And I understood sort of the importance of it because you want to tell everybody this we are serious about going after this guy. But when you do that, Chaim, it obviously that sets the bar a little bit higher. Looking back at sort of how that statement, am I looking too much into this? In terms of hey, because I had never heard anyone say Plan A before. It was for anybody. But when you do that as a member of the bar or as an executive for the Boston Red Sox, the expectation is, well, they're the Boston Red Sox. They're going to get Plan A. What was your thought behind that?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I actually knew it in the moment. I think you were there. I think that was.
No, I wasn't there.
That's right. You didn't make it.
I was coaching my basketball team.
Yeah, well, you didn't miss much. But yeah, you were supposed to be there, and you bailed on us.
That's true. Look at your memory. All right, there you go.
But I definitely understand that, and I knew it when I said that. But I also the alternative is to go out there and do a bunch of press conference speak and say, try to qualify every single thing you say and say, oh, there's different options, free agency, blah, blah, blah. And basically just to say a bunch of stuff and not really say anything. And we could have done that. And, at the end of the day, I don't know that that's going to change how anybody feels about the ultimate outcome. And so if the only risk of saying it is, hey, if it ends up, which we knew it could have, if it ends up going somewhere where there is, it's really hard, but there is a business side to this where you say, hey, we just should not do that in terms of what the contract needs to be in order to get them. And you don't have them. And then people come back and say, well, this was Plan A, you missed on Plan A, and that's a bad look. I'm willing to wear that. I'd rather do that than just go out there and say nothing when asked that question, instead of being honest that, we were hoping it all lined up. And I recognize at the end of the day, we can choose to make it line up, but there is a point where there's a business side to this, just like there is for players. And if that was a risk we were taking by saying that, that really doesn't concern me. At the end of the day, reality is the same. And I'd rather have been forthright when I was asked that at the GM meetings than just hid behind a bunch of talk, just to preemptively cover my ass if it didn't work.
How did Plan A change? You defined Xander as Plan A at the GM meetings. Did the perception of Plan A being Xander change from in March? So I guess the question is, was he Plan A then? Was he Plan A then? And also, if you knew what the market was going to be like, would you have changed your approach even slightly back in March? Because once he got into free agency, we saw all it takes is one, and that one was San Diego.
Yeah, look, I figured we'd be talking about this eventually because, what I have not actually heard in the last several days is necessarily something saying like, hey, take everything else out of it. Red Sox should have gone to that territory to secure Xander. A lot of the conversation is more about what came before that. Without getting into every bit of it, because like I said, I think some of it probably should stay behind the curtain. I think that's fair. That's something that we need to think about, that we need to look at. I do think the dynamics of actually fairly doing these extensions when players are not yet at free agency but close are harder if you're trying to really make rational decisions than I think people realize when you look at how a lot of those turn out and so forth. But all that said, I do think, at the end of the day, we should look at that because it's something, that, frankly, like I think the Red Sox have at times struggled with and probably struggle with here is, finding the path and finding the right time to find a path with homegrown players who want to be here. Doesn't mean you're going to find it all the time. That's not realistic. That's just not how baseball works now. But anytime you don't, I think, even though some of the narrative surrounding that may be unrealistic, it's also something that we have to look at and assess. And believe me, we have done that. We will do it.
I do want to get into the sort of the extension talk. We talked a lot about that in the last podcast. I found it really, really interesting. And obviously that includes Devers coming up, but just to sort of loop back on that is that we didn't know, Chaim, about what this market was going to be like. I mean, it wasn't that long ago where I was interviewing players in spring training and they're talking about how they botched the CBA and players are taking extensions all over the place because the free agent market wasn't what they had hoped. And then you have this market and it's completely opposite. So just to go back to sort of like when you're planning out that extension and when you say, well, we have to look at that, is it sort of, do you look back and say, you know what, could we have seen this coming, this free agent market? And because of that, we should have made, I don't want to say, hey, listen, you make what you think is the best effort, but made a better effort to not let Xander get the free agency.
Yeah, look, obviously the way the market's played out to this point this winter has been, I think it's been a really hot market, no two ways about it. And these things do kind of go up and down. And obviously we've even seen that over the last several years. Will it always be this way going forward? I think that's harder to know. The way we're all wired as human beings is the way anything is right now. We always think that that's just the way it's always going to be. And anybody who did that, last winter, the winter before, obviously has been proven wrong. But if you're doing that now, you might get proven wrong on the other side too. Some of these things are harder to predict than we think. Obviously it has changed the way a lot of things looked in the spring. That's just the case. And that's obviously the timing of when Xander's free agency was coming up and he stepped down into free agency at a time when the market was really, really robust.
Did it surprise you that if I asked you back in whatever, April or even going through the year, did it surprise you that this market was going to be as crazy as it has been? And I understand crazy is a relative term, but did the market surprise you the way it's trending?
I think to some degree. I mean, some of it I think, we foresaw and was foreseeable just because some of these trends that you usually see, when a new CBA is in place, the certainty usually leads to greater investment. When, obviously we had not experienced what it's like to go through COVID, come out of COVID. Not that COVID is very much still with us, but to come out of the impact that COVID was having on the economics of the game, which as 2022 rolled on, we seem to be mostly through, at least for now. So some of those things I think were foreseeable. I think some of it also has to do with the fact that there's a lot of teams who are naturally coming out of down cycles where they were more restrained because they had to kind of regroup and even rebuild. And that's not the case now. Some of those things are cyclical. And again, there could be points. Look, there were points last winter, whether it was before the lockout or after the lockout, when things looked to be really rocking and rolling. And then you look back and there were still, points where it kind of stopped or slowed, because it is still a question of what individual teams are willing to do. But it's certainly been really vibrant. I think at the end of the day, it's really good for the game. But I think what we've seen over the last few weeks has been pretty intense.
It's been nutty. I mean, out of the gate, with the relief pitchers and everything else. And so I guess you come out of the season and listen, you want to put your best foot forward with Xander, and by some accounts, ownership meets with him. Everyone's saying how much they love you, Xander. Xander wants to stay. When you came out of the season, what was your feeling? And with the understanding that it can go anyway, and the market can go anyway, and all it takes is one team, all of that. But coming out of the season, looking back, were you optimistic about getting the deal done with Xander?
Hopeful. Yeah. I mean, look, it was pretty clear. We engaged literally the day after the season. And it was pretty clear at that point that he was going to test free agency, which, again, not begrudging that in any way. Look, the guy, again, he's played for 10 years and had never gone through this process. And now he was literally weeks away from it. I think for him not to go through it at that point would have been a shock. And I think that was likely to be the case no matter what. And, he and Scott made that pretty clear to us that they still wanted to stay engaged. And that, Xander has been very clear, both publicly and privately, about how much he liked playing in Boston. And that didn't change throughout that process, but it was also something where they were going to see what the market held.
Did you get a chance to, have a face-to-face during the negotiations with Xander? I mean, I know that it doesn't mean as much, and for teams that the guy's already playing with, that's not as important. We go through the whole recruiting conversation, but I don't know if you've got a chance to have a face-to-face with him. And the last thing is the last thing with regard to that conversation is, did you get a chance to speak to Xander since he agreed to the deal with the Padres? Yeah,
so not during the negotiations, no face-to-face. The last one that I had with him was after the season, before he went home, and then eventually he went to Arizona, and he wasn't quite there yet at the time that I was out west in the GM meeting, so we didn't connect there. We traded some messages, throughout the process. Obviously the negotiations were through Scott, but we traded some messages, and we've traded messages since this whole thing happened, but haven't spoken yet. I'm sure we will at some point. The last face-to-face was in Boston.
Listen, I've said this. I think that you can have a very good team this year. There's a couple guys that we can't talk about because deals aren't done, and you get still money to spend and all of that. But as we know, I don't know if you know this, you've had to make some hard decisions, and the two biggest ones are two guys that could potentially be in the Hall of Fame. That's just how it is. Which one, in totally different circumstances. And we had talked about, when you traded Mookie, it was a big part of this was, you had to build up the farm system. You had to have the support system, all of that. But still, like, the reaction is the same, or relatively the same. For you, which of those stung more? I don't know how else to put it. Which of you stung more man, this is a hard one to wear for a couple days.
Yeah. Well, it's more than a couple days. I mean,
listen, when you see the kids and the wife and you get some rest and, you refresh, and now you move on to the next level of free agency, the next level of trades. I would imagine or the next move, it's not going to go away. I understand that. But, the initial, which one stings?
Yeah, no, look, and honestly, I get I understand like a lot of things. I knew this when I came here, that there were going to be a lot of things, no matter what we chose, as long as we were making choices that ultimately were not irresponsible. And I don't think the organization had any margin for error and any irresponsible choices when I walked in the door. I think things were in a pretty difficult spot. Look, making, any kind of reasoned choice was going to lead to me being the bad guy. And that's something I don't like that or want it, but I recognize it kind of comes with the territory. And, I don't worry about that really, at the same time, these decisions, I think because we make these business decisions, I think people might assume that, whatever, this guy's got ice in his veins, he makes it, and then it's on to the next thing and doesn't wear it all. And you could ask my wife or my kids, that trust me, that is not the case. And I know that's also going to be hollow for our fans to hear, because they're like, well, guess what? You still get to make the decision. The rest of us don't. We still have those same feelings. So I get that. And that is just the reality of the situation. I think, look, I've been here longer now, so maybe this one's just fresher, but I think there's a lot more kind of layered onto it. And obviously we haven't seen how it's going to play out yet. And I do have a lot of confidence that we're going to surprise people this year. Some of that is because, we're coming off a down year where, frankly, I think the talent in the room, and I think the guys maybe did say this or would have said this at the last week of the season when everybody was sort of taking stock of what happened. The talent in the room was a lot better than the record we put up. But, look, you rewind to the Mookie thing. That was obviously tough. And I told people when I came in that I didn't expect that we were going to trade him. And that was true. I didn't think that there would be something on the table that I thought made sense for us to punt that last year with Mookie. But I also felt where the organization was, and you and I talked about this the last time I was on the show, that it did not make sense to try to do what would have been required to do an extension with him, that it wasn't something that we were well set up to win with. And I would stand by that. I don't think, in 2021, coming out of like a year where we had no fans, and by the way, at the time we were making all of our offseason decisions, we were still at a point where we had not been cleared to have a single fan in Fenway Park in 2021. And we still were backed by ownership, to be able, on a relative basis, to do some things financially that a lot of other organizations weren't. But even within what we were able to do and cleared to do, I don't think that if we had Mookie and what that would have cost us in terms of other things that we did, I don't think that we would have been able to have the season we had in 2021. And obviously, the rest of it's going to play out from there. Now, this one, obviously, we don't know yet how it's going to play out. But just because I've been here longer, I think, the connection to the organization, I've worked with Xander for 3 years, right? And got to see him up close. And it's every bit of what you would think. And as an opponent, this guy wore us out with the Rays, and you could just sort of see from across the field, not just the talent, but how his teammates felt about him. And that's all real. And it's even more real behind closed doors. So that part of it hurts. And, I knew that, if he left, that it was going to really hurt. And I do wear that, I think, more than people think. Still have to make the right decisions for the organization. That comes with the territory. But that doesn't make it easy from an emotional standpoint.
Well, you mentioned the clubhouse, the guys. I mean, there hasn't been a player, whether it's recently retired guys, whether it's guys on the team, the leaders of the team who were so vocal about Xander. I mean, that's another part of this, right? And it's just the cost of doing business. You much like, you in the trade deadline, you had to go to the team, you had to address the team, you talk. That was probably went a long, long way with those guys. Communicate your thought, your feelings, and all that. Do you have to do something similar with some of these guys? I mean, there's not the foundational guys, the veteran guys. You're sort of having some turnover, but there's still guys. I mean, there's still guys who are very vocal about we need to keep Xander. We need to keep Xander. Do you have to do that?
Yeah, that's part of this. I mean, that's already happening. I think it's part of it, and I think that's true about decisions, large or small. Whether it's with a 10-year veteran, whether it's with a a cornerstone player in the organization, or whether it's with someone who is an up and down player, who might be getting sent down and not liking the circumstances of why that's happening. We just like we ask for accountability from our players for what they do, and that they stand behind the things that they do, we owe them that. It doesn't matter if they're here for a day or they're here for 10 years. That's part of it.
You talked about extensions, the importance of extensions. I would imagine that the importance of extensions, and even before we knew this free agent market, we knew how valuable they were. And we had talked about this on the last podcast about how the organization really had gone sort of in a dry spell with this. You did Garrett Whitlock. That was a step in the right direction. And I know that you've tried to do other guys, including trying to do Rafael Devers well before this. But does it become more important than ever to do those extensions? And also, does it become more difficult than ever, particularly with a guy like Devers, because not only because he's so deep in his contract commitment with the team, but also just because the price seems to be going up every single minute.
Yeah, and again, like I said, it's somewhat subjective how you forecast where the market's going to go from here and look out, and it's obviously speculative, and people can look at that differently. But long and short of it is, I think it's important on both sides. With Rafi, we've felt this way, and obviously we haven't found it yet, and he's done what he's done on the field and put himself in a really good position. The way I look at this is, if there's anything within reason or even a little outside of reason that will keep him here, it's something we're gonna pursue, and we're serious about that. Again, I've said this before. It's true. It's all talk till we have a deal, right? So I know that nothing's changed with that. And then as far as young players, this is something that I've talked about actually for a little while, and we talked about it. For every 5, 6, 7 approaches you make, you might get one deal. But it's something that the organization used to do and kind of got away from, and something I believe in, and that I think we weren't at a point, obviously, we're not at a point with Rafi where we're in that part of his career. We weren't at a point with Xander. I mean, Xander had already done one extension, right? He already put free agency off once. But we should be in the business of doing those. It's a little bit of a different calculus, because really then you're talking about players really early in their careers who have not had security, and it's kind of a risk-sharing proposition where they may be taking some upside off the table for themselves financially in order to get that security, and basically taking the risk that when you're a player and you go through your career, it's all on you. The team is basically taking on some of that risk earlier in the player's career by guaranteeing them a bunch of money, and in exchange looking for extending the term of control. And really what that takes, and I'd said this to you before, I think is what it takes is you have to have faith that the contract is not going to change the person. But if you can check that box, and obviously the talent is there, it's something we should pursue. And we have been doing that. We will continue to do it.
You were part of one of the most notable early contract extensions of the Evan Longoria deal. And I mean, he was like a week out into his major league career, whatever it was. Maybe I'm wrong, but it was very early. But looking back at that dynamic, is it more difficult? Is it more difficult to do? Like you said, you might hit on one of every 7 or 8, but is it more difficult to do than it was back then?
There's no question. I think it was a newer concept back then. You didn't see as many of these. I mean, you had seen in the 90s with Cleveland doing a lot of deals that bought out arbitration. The notion of buying out arbitration and getting either guaranteed years or club option years on free agency was fairly new at the time. And the market has evolved and changed and moved a lot since then. And there are a lot of forces, both institutionally, interpersonally, that get in the way of players doing these, even when they might be disposed to do them. I'm not saying that's wrong. It might be wise in a lot of cases for guys to bet on themselves, but there are a lot of forces pulling them away from these types of deals, more so than I think there used to be back in those days. I just view it as it's a personal decision. I don't think that we should begrudge anybody who doesn't want to do it or feels like they want to set the bar in a place that we feel isn't a good business decision for us. That's a personal decision. What we can do is identify who we want to go after and to what extent, and go do it.
Does the way that things have transpired over the last month or so with the market. Does that make you more motivated than ever to not let a guy like Devers get to free agency? I mean, there's no other way to put it, because the perception is, I think, and you, like you said, things can turn. Who knows? I mean, we don't know a year from now. But the perception is that in the last month and a half, that he probably made himself some money in terms of how he's valued, just because of the way the market is. And you just experienced the pitfalls of free agency. We already knew it. But does that motivate you even more to get a deal done with him?
Yeah, I mean, short answer is yes, and we have been motivated. Look, every day between now and free agency obviously puts us closer to that time. That's not to say it's all a one-way street, right? There's risk the other way, and sometimes you've seen it in the history of the Red Sox. You've seen it in some other organizations where longtime players do go to free agency and end up staying with their teams. So it doesn't always work out this way, but obviously you're introducing a level of risk, letting it get to that point. So, my short answer to that is yes. I gave you kind of a longer answer too.
And you said something in passing real quick, but you said, I'm going to paraphrase, but you said of what's reasonable and what's a little bit beyond reasonable. I mean, I've said this, I tweeted the other day. I said, you can't complain about a team signing a guy saying, oh, I wouldn't pay that much for it, because that's the cost of doing business in free agency, right?
Yeah, and it's part of why it takes a lot of things besides free agency, a lot of things besides these types of contracts to build an organization, because you look at any winning organization, you can't build it solely on those types of deals. But we are fortunate here in Boston, those types of things can be part of our portfolio. So we should be willing to do them. Like I said, those deals, there are situations, not everything just sits in a spreadsheet. There are situations where it makes sense to extend. Even in a place like Boston, you can't build a team doing just that. You have to do other things. You have to develop and grow players. You have to find the right complementary players. But we can do it sometimes, and we should be willing to make those bets when it makes sense.
All right, this is a question which is probably going to give me sort of a we'll see answer, but your gut right now when it comes to the shortstop position, do you have the guy on your team, or do you think that the way that things are trending that you'll get someone from the other outside the organization?
Yeah, I do have to give you a we'll see answer. Look, even as I was talking about plan A, even saying that suggests there obviously needs to be other plans. And at that time, you don't know exactly what the market's going to look like. We are fortunate going into it. We have a couple guys on the team that we feel can do it and are perfectly qualified to do it. But we also want to look at all options outside the organization too, hoping all the while that it wasn't going to come to any of those. But now that it has, we have a little bit more information on the market, on what options are available to us. We'll obviously have to see how it plays out. I'm not ready to come out there and plant a flag, but I will say it's nice to have options on the team. Now, obviously, even if it stays internal, that still means we want to make the team better in other ways. The bottom line is, winning is a bigger goal than any one player. That's what we're here to do, and we have to make sure we put a team out there that can do that.
All right, like I said at the beginning, I want to give you the opportunity to say, okay, let's get back the reality back on track here. That there's a lot of, believe me, there's a lot of stuff flying around before, during, after, and everything else. As I said in the last podcast, I asked you, said you could ask me anything you wanted, because I asked you a lot of questions and I appreciate you answering them. But I think the better thing to do, because what are you going to ask me? Like, how was the David Ortiz charity golf tournament? It was great. I get to see Rick Porcello. It was great. So, what is the thing? Is there anything that you want to sort of use this forum to say, hey, listen, I hear this out there, and this isn't like you defending yourself or anything, but I just getting things like, here's the reality of this situation. Is there anything along those lines?
I don't think it makes sense for me to say, hey, we got to get our narrative out there or whatever. There isn't, I think, any attempt to kind of sugarcoat what happened Wednesday night is frankly, we're barking up the wrong tree. I think what we can say is okay, where do we go from here? And the fact of the matter is, even if, as we talked about, maybe there's some things that the organization would do over, looking way back in history, different departures, things like that. The organization always kept going, picked itself up, whether immediately or eventually, and won again. And that's all we're focused on doing. That's ultimately what we owe our fans, is a good team and winning baseball. And I feel very confident that we're going to be capable of that we're going to have a good group, and that there's a lot of things really. Alex has talked about it. We talked a lot about it with each other in September, that we can do to put our players in better position to win and help them be their best selves, which really, when you look at winning organizations now in today's era, that's what they do really well. They get a lot out of the talent that they have. And we certainly are going to go into the spring with enough talent in that room to put together an October run. And as we've seen the last few years, if you are capable of playing in October, especially coming out of the AL East, which in 2023 is probably going to be the best division in the history of the game, then you are capable of winning it all. And that is ultimately what we need to be focused on. I know right now for fans, it's very hard to see that. I'm not trying to take any of that away, but that's really where we're looking forward. And I definitely feel like with the group of players that we have and players that we're going to continue to add, with the organization that we have, with the manager and staff that we have, we are going to be in position to do that. We have to go prove it. But I think it's going to be really important for our group to have that mindset going into spring training. When you look at 2021, one of the things that stood out to me, there were a lot of things you could say going into 2021 about that club that we put together going into the spring, even aside from looking at how we played in 2020. Take that out of it. Just look at that club. You could have poked all sorts of holes in that team. That wasn't good enough here, wasn't good enough there. What about this question mark? What about that question mark? Whatever we do between now and spring training, I'm sure that's gonna be the same coming into the spring, but just with the emotional temperature turned up because of everything that has happened. The fact of the matter is, in 21, and I give our players credit for this, I give Alex and the staff a lot of credit for this, really everybody in the organization a lot of credit. We came into spring training and there was a sense of purpose there in that camp. And nobody was focused on what we didn't have or what question marks there were. They were focused on going out and winning. And yeah, we got our teeth kicked in that first series by Baltimore, but then we got hot. And there were ups and downs during that year too, but at our best, and you saw this nowhere more than in the playoffs, where for 2.5 weeks, I think everybody who is associated with this organization thought there is no stopping us. We are taking this all the way. We didn't get there, but that feeling existed because of culture and environment and people. And it had nothing to do with any of those questions. And it existed in spite of us knowing, look, we are not a perfect team on paper. I thought last year we had more talent in the room than we did in 21. I think this year we're going to have more talent in the room than we did in 21. It's really a question of having the right mindset. I feel really confident with, again, the people we have in this organization that we're going to have that. It's going to be on us to make it as easy as possible, understanding that this is tough right now, easy as possible for our fans to feel that too, because our fans are a tremendous asset for us that help us win. And we're going to have that feeling when we roll into spring training. I'm confident of that. And we need to find ways to let our fans in on that. That's not going to take away the pain of seeing a player we all love go play somewhere else. But if we have that for real, we are going to be able to ride that, and we're going to be able to win. And we need to let our fans in on that as much as we possibly can.
Last thing, besides a sweet Baseballs and Boring red hoodie, which are just coming out, being released, which would be a nice compliment to the T-shirt you're wearing. What do you want to add here? What do you want to add to the team? I know there's a couple moves, that you can't talk about because they aren't officially announced. But going into this week, going to the week after, what are some of the things that you sort of want to prioritize?
Yeah, look, this isn't to rule out anything that's kind of quote unquote off the board, because I think you always have to be open to different possibilities that strengthen us. I definitely would like, obviously, I think even though we have good, like I said, good internal options at short, hoping to make us a little stronger up the middle. That's something where, I do feel like we're on our way, obviously, to adding, some offense to the club, but to make us a little stronger up the middle, whether that's offensively, defensively, or both. I think now with the way the roster sits and with some of what we have, coming down the pike, that we could use, some right-handed power, or just right-handed bat. It doesn't have to necessarily be power. We just need to be able to produce runs from both sides of the plate. And then obviously to continue to strengthen the pitching staff. I do think, we're in a position where Alex actually has said this in a couple, I don't know if he said it publicly, I think he has, where, again, you take out the context and all of the noise surrounding 2022, and you look at this group of young starting pitchers that we have racked up, you could say, man, it's a pretty interesting group. And we have some veterans in front of them to lead them, but it'd be great to continue to add to that group. But I think we're in really good shape as far as having young guys who can take the ball and grow and develop. Again, it's on us. It's on them too, but it's on us to get the most out of that guy. So there's going to be talent in that room to keep runs off the board much more successfully than we did in 2022. And we have to put everybody in position to do it.
Well, I hope you had a good time, man. I know it's a tough time for you. I get that. I can't tell you how much we appreciate you coming on. I think that a lot of people appreciate you coming on. Honestly, it's tough conversations, but like you said, I mean, it's good conversations, and this is I hope that you felt like this was a forum where you were able to have that sort of discussion, which is important, right?
Yeah, look, you guys you're not shying away from tough questions. There's not softballs in here. But we also have a chance to really talk through things, which is good. And something, like I said, I believe it. We ask it of our players. We ask it of everybody in the organization. Accountability, own what you do, be clear about where you're at and what you're trying to accomplish. We owe that back to everybody who works in this organization, especially our players, and we owe it to our fans. And so I'm not going to shy away from any opportunity to provide that in any forum, but I appreciate both the questions. And like I said, they're not easy questions, but just the willingness to discuss this more at length. Like I said, when I saw you in the airport, I think some people might have thought I was sort of surprised that he was leaving at that point. I wasn't. If anything was hitting me, it was, knowing this was coming, it was still kind of the finality in that moment of knowing, what this was going to mean and for how many people and how much work lies ahead of us to get everybody back where they need to be and feeling about the organization like they have felt in the past. Because I know when people feel like that, I know the environment that we have when we earn it. We got to go earn it.
Did you sleep on the plane?
A little bit.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah.
Good for you.
I'm not great at sleeping on planes, but like I said, coming out of the winter meetings it's one of the most exhausting baseball events of the year. Every year, even when nothing happens. So it's at some point, you can't keep your eyes open anymore.
A little known fact, and everyone's going to want to cherish this statement. It's the only time I've thrown up on a plane coming back from the Vegas winter meetings.
Oh, wow. So which one? You talking about in 18 or in 08?
No, 08.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. The recycled air and standing, it's not good. It's not good. Okay.
Did you,
anyway,
this is kind of gross, I guess, but did you get it all in the bag?
Yeah, well, yes. It was the first time I understood that the technology of those bags are good. They work. And also, Dan Duquette was the row in front of me. And
oh, man.
So I think that he got a kick out of it. So anyway, Chaim, thanks a lot, man. I appreciate it. Happy holidays, and we'll talk to you soon.
You bet. Sounds good. Thank you, guys.